Hello, everybody. So nice to have you join me today. Just doing just a quick video to respond to a lot of questions I've been getting about objective morality. As many of you know, I had a debate with Mark Reid, a friend of mine, a very smart guy. Did a really good job in that debate. He absolutely crushed me, and he's so polite. You know, he says, "Oh, I don't consider debates to be about wins and losses. I was just glad to have a good conversation." But I'll be honest about it. He absolutely destroyed me. He did such a good job in that debate. And so I've kind of worked on some of the arguments, some things he brought up. And I wanted to, since it'll be a long time before we can schedule a debate together because of our schedules. I figured I would just do a video about it. And then maybe I can invite him to the channel if he's got time and we can discuss it live, or he might do a response video, or maybe we'll chat back and forth on Discord or something. But Mark did actually leave a comment on the video link that I had up on my channel from the debate because I had posted a syllogism. And let's see what he has to say here. So, as always, Mark is very polite. He says, "Thanks, OE. It was a great debate. I think you did fantastic. I like your syllogism, but I will attempt to throw a wrench in it. If you have agency and make goals, what if your goal is to not be well or healthy, or if you're wanting to seek slavery? Do you need freedom and well being for that?" So I actually did address some of that in the debate, but I'll go ahead and do that again here and also bring up some updated points on the syllogism itself, because he's right. The syllogism I used was broken, and I think I've shored up some of the holes, but I'll try to do a better job of defining objective morality for you, because I do know that you can get an objective principle for morality. The key is to try and put it into a functional syllogism or functional argument, and it's a really tall task. It's very difficult to do. But let's see if I can take that off the screen for right now. Let me just go into some of the notes I had for the debate to address that comment directly here. And I think I want to give some definitions as well. So with morality, what are we talking about, right? We're talking about a set of principles or values that determine what moral agents ought to do. This is sometimes referred to as normative claims, right? What ought we do? And it's relative to people, what people ought to do, decisions people ought to make. So, and lower intelligence animals, that doesn't make sense, but animals with a lower intelligence do not have agency. We don't necessarily know that they set goals and take actions. So morality is discussing what people ought to do, right? We don't consider it to be immoral when the lion kills the deer, for example, right? So subjective is stance dependent. Objective would be the opposite, stance independent. I do use logic for one of my arguments. We know the three primary laws of logic are the law of identity, the law of non-contradiction, and the law of the excluded middle. And there are multiple ways to try to run this argument, which is why I do believe that objective morality is true, because you can look at it from so many different angles. There is the natural angle, right, through the laws of nature. So something like that would be like the causal link that leads from morality to human flourishing is simplified by the statement, morals are universal propositions which are necessary preconditions for cooperation. This is a natural process that leads to human flourishing, which is guided by the natural laws of evolution. All natural laws must follow the laws of logic and are necessarily true and stance independent. They are objective. So the first syllogism that I used in the debate with Mark, and it does have some holes in it, so I think I've shorted up. I'm going to run that syllogism in its revised edition here and see if I've fixed some of the problems. So premise number one would be, as a human being, I'm a moral agent. Agency means I set goals and take actions. In order to achieve my goals, I need my freedom and well-being. If I need my freedom and well-being, then I have a reason to have my freedom and well-being. If I have a reason to have my freedom and well-being because I am a moral agent, then all moral agents have a reason to have their freedom and well-being. The conclusion there is, therefore, is then that all human beings have a reason to have their freedom and well-being. If all human beings have a reason to have their freedom and well-being, then they ought to have it. Thus, all moral agents ought not interfere with others' freedom and well-being. Moral actions are actions by moral agents that affect others' freedom and well-being. Therefore, all human beings ought to act morally. If all human beings ought to act morally, then morality is universal. If morals are universal, then they are not stance dependent and must apply to all possible universes with moral agents. Therefore, morality is objective. So this kind of deals with the first part of Mark's question, in that what if your goal is to not be well and not to be healthy? The morality actually applies to people who are reasonable and intelligent and rational. So we see this in court of law, for example, when it comes to trying to ascribe culpability in certain situations, right? Culpability is described as what would a reasonable person do in the same situation, right? So if somebody does not want to be well or healthy, we do not consider that to be a reasonable position to have. Normative statements, ought statements, are what reasonable people would do in the same circumstance, right? So a person who really intentionally does not want to be well or does not want to be healthy, we consider that to be an unreasonable position to hold. However, because morality is objective, they still need their freedom and well-being to make that decision. They still have a right to make that decision for themselves. So if a person wants to take drugs or drink alcohol excessively or whatever it might be, that's not good for them. But they have their own right to their own decision-making process, which means we do not have a right to stop them from doing those things. As long as they're not hurting other people in the process, it's just themselves. If their desire is to not be well and not be healthy, they should have a right to live out that life if that's what they choose for themselves, including the right to choose for themselves to not live any longer. But that all still comes down to them being agents, right? They set goals and take actions. Their goals are unhealthy. We would tell them, a reasonable person would say, hey, that's an unhealthy goal, but they still deserve to be able to set that goal for themselves. When it comes to slavery, I actually addressed this in our debate. So let's see if I can run this same syllogism. This one is unchanged. So premise number one, if subjective morality, I should also tell you, this is based on the laws of logic, which is what I mentioned earlier, right? The law of non-contradiction. Contradictions can't exist, so contradictions therefore must be false. One or more premises have to be false, right? So if subjective morality can lead to logical contradiction, then one or both moral claims must be false. If a moral claim is objectively true, then it must be universally true, follow the laws of logic, and be stance independent. The third premise is subjective morality leads to logical contradictions. The conclusion would be that morality is objective. And this deals exactly with the second part of Mark's question about slavery, right? What if a person, they need their freedom and well-being to become a slave owner, right? They want to own slaves. That is true. However, if we try to make that a moral claim, it becomes contradictory. And here's how. So for example, for premise number 3, how does subjective morality lead to logical contradictions? The slave owner values his own freedom and well-being. Therefore, it is a logical contradiction to say he is morally justified in taking away the same freedom and well-being which he values himself away from another person. He can do it, but he cannot justify it epistemically using his own standard of values. So the contradiction is within his own internal system of values. Freedom and well-being must either be valuable or not valuable. The biggest objection that I get from everybody when I have this conversation, and Mark did a great job in the debate of hammering down on this point, and I did not have the proper notes in front of me, so I did not address the problem, but it's the is-ought problem, right? Hume's famous guillotine. The thing about Hume's guillotine that a lot of people don't realize, and I should have tried to do this from memory. I didn't have the notes in front of me. I uploaded the wrong notes to my tablet, which is what I used for the debate. I didn't realize it until Sarah was introducing us, at which point then I panicked and I thought, oh no, I don't know if I should try and scramble to try and figure out which notes I need and which I didn't. So I just ran with what I had, which was an older form of this argument. But David Hume, he did not say that this is some kind of universal principle that you cannot get an is from an ought, or excuse me, an ought from an is. He specifically came up with what's called the guillotine in response to religious claims that if God sets the moral values, then we ought to act morally. And the reason this is problematic is because there's no connecting premise. Why ought we do this? What if we don't believe in this God? right? That's a huge problem. That was David Hume's problem, for example. The other thing is, what if we believe in this God, but for some reason don't care what this God thinks, right? So you get what is a subjective moral view. It's no longer objective, and it's called divine command theory. Specifically, is what that is. God says, "Do this." Whatever God says is I'm going to do because God is God, and so therefore you're following these divine commands. So Immanuel Kant actually showed this. In fact, David Hume himself talked about this in his own moral system. And I think I found a video clip of Richard Carrier talking about that in more detail. But Immanuel Kant, he's famous for attacking Hume's argument, right? And Immanuel Kant spent 11 years, maybe 13 years, really just focusing on Hume. And what Kant came up with was what's called the hypothetical imperative, right? So you get a conditional is statement, and you can derive oughts from these conditional is statements. So, for example, in a hypothetical, you might say, if a doctor, this is a well-known one. In fact, Carrier uses this one a lot. If a doctor wants to perform a successful surgery, he ought to sterilize his equipment, right? Another example would be, if you want to get rich, you ought to save your money. So these are examples of hypothetical imperatives, right? They are conditional, but they are is statements. Let me see if I can pull up a video.
And it's similar to like relativity theory in physics, where you are in time or where your velocity and so forth can all vary based on what your reference frame is. So it's relative, but it's also objective, right? So it's a physical fact, and there's an objective fact about what your relative framework is. And a lot of moral realists take that same view with morality. So morality can be both relative, but it still has true moral facts. So like what your relative position is in a system entails certain moral facts. You don't get to just flippantly decide what they are. They follow necessarily from the situation that you are in, and so that's the sort of relative system. And I think a lot of theists play word games with this, and I have some articles about what do people really mean by relative, subjective, objective, etc. But it is true. You can go to the Phil Papers survey and look and see the statistics, and it is most philosophers, just in general, are moral realists, but also most atheists. You can actually do a selection for atheists and moral realism, and yes, that is actually the dominant view.
And what do you make of the is-ought dilemma from David Hume?
Yeah, this gets misused a lot. I've seen people try to browbeat other people with this idea that Hume proved that you can't get an is from an ought. That's actually false. Hume never said you can't get an is from an ought, or an ought from an is. What he said was that he'd not seen what he called vulgar systems of morality, in other words, Christian morality, popular morality. He'd never seen that done for those systems of morality. So when Christians come to him and say, here's morality, his argument was that they never connect the is to the ought. So they never.
So this is Richard Carey. I'll put a link to that video in the description. I will also, by the way, get a link to Mark Reid's channel as well, so you can check him out. I really like Mark Reid's content. He is a great guy. Mark Reid is not only a very strong debater, a very intelligent person, but he's the type of person that you really would want to have as a neighbor, no matter whether you're a religious person, an atheist, a science denier, a scientist, whatever. He may not agree with certain positions that you hold, but Mark is a type of a human being that is empathetic. And if let's say you went out to your car and it wouldn't start in the morning, you could go knock on his door and say, Mark, my car won't start. I got to get the kids to school. He would absolutely either take you himself or give you a jump start or something like that. I do find him to be a very genuine human being. And so I really, I encourage you guys to check out his channel. You may not agree with all of his positions. I know Mark and I obviously have disagreements about objective versus subjective morality, for example. And I don't know about political views. I'm an independent centrist, so I may not fall on the same side of politics in every issue with him, but we always get along because he and I both care very much about our fellow human beings, and that's across the board. So we attack people's ideas, but we don't attack people. So I'm going to make sure to get a link to this video with Richard Carrier talking about the is-ought problem and how he comes up with objective morality through the hypothetical imperative, and also to Mark's channel as well. So let me see here. Let me get into, I talked a little about the hypothetical imperative, talked about the is-ought gap. Let me go down to the final syllogisms that I had put together. And so I have two more syllogisms that I put together. Yeah, let's run these. These are pretty short, so bear with me. So one of these is basically an argument from nature for a natural, um, the natural law of morality, right? Like from Aquinas or something like that. So the first premise would be that morals are normative actions that benefit societies and lead to human flourishing via cooperation. If you want to live in a society with immoral, excuse me, if you want to live in a society, okay, sorry, I can't read here. If you want to live in a society without immoral actions like murder and theft, you ought to act morally. Normative moral-based actions have observable, testable, predictable, and repeatable outcomes. For example, murder leads to revenge, theft leads to distrust, slavery leads to revolt, etc. The decision to act morally is indeed subjective. However, the moral behaviors themselves are conditional, descriptive, normative. If A, then B, and therefore morality is objective. And this objective position is based on the conditional. If you want to live in a society without murder, if you want to live in a society where cooperation, right, is encouraged, right? And we know that as a social species of animal, cooperation is paramount to our survival. It's paramount to human flourishing. So morality gives us this objective standard of how to achieve the goal. The decision to go for the goal is indeed conditional. And this is where people get caught up on subjective versus objective morality, right? The goal itself, whether or not you decide to strive for that goal, is subjective. That's your own decision of whether or not you want to do that. Once you have decided, and I believe, and I think many philosophers are in agreement with me, that any reasonable, intelligent, rational human being does want to live in a society without murder. Any reasonable, rational, intelligent human being wants to live in a society without theft, so on and so forth. So once a reasonable and rational, intelligent person is given the option A, I want to live in a society that's functioning with cooperation, or B, I want to go around murdering everybody with a chainsaw, most people are going to choose option number A. Once that option is chosen, then you can derive an objective standard for how to achieve that goal. I hear this argument brought up a lot by atheists, in fact, ironically enough, when they talk to Christians about divine command theory versus objective morality, right? So they say that, okay, for example, human beings come up with the game of chess, right? Subjectively, we invented the game of chess. We picked the rules. We decided what they're going to be. Once those rules are established, that means that both players are in agreement to what the rules are. Then you can come up with objectively true and false statements about what is an objectively good or objectively bad move to make in pursuit of that goal. This is why we can get computers to be really good at chess, because there are objectively, mathematically justified moves that can be made to accomplish the goal. So computers can do it because they can be given a set of parameters, right, that they're working within. Human beings can do the same thing. There are objectively true good moves and there are objectively true bad moves that you can make to win the game of chess. Where you get a true objective standard when it comes to morality is that nature is the one that's setting the rules for this game of chess, except instead of a game of chess, it's the game of life, right? Nature's establishing that if you want to be in a cooperative system, these are the steps you will take, objectively speaking, that will help you to attain that goal. Nature's objective, humans deciding to or not to participate in the game itself, that is subjective. Then on the other side of that, you have another objective standard, and that is the moral objective values of our decisions and of our actions, okay? The final argument would come from desire. And again, this is going to be a desire that is relative to people who are rational, reasonable, and intelligent, okay? All people are moral agents, which means they set goals and take actions. If you want to live in a society without immoral actions like murder and theft, you ought to act morally. Living a moral life allows you to attain self-respect. Your ultimate goal as a rational and reasonable person is to have a good life. Without self-respect, no one can live a good life because they are lacking something they desire. Every rational and reasonable person wants to live a good life. This makes morality universal. If morality is universal, then moral actions are always consistent in all possible universes with moral agents who want to live a good life, and therefore morality is objective. So this is probably one of the strongest arguments I've been able to put together. I will put these syllogisms in the description of the video, just like I did last time, for people to pick through, try to pick them apart. I really appreciate everybody's pushback and feedback on this. I do really try to encourage everybody who participates on my channel to share their ideas and to push back on each other's ideas, to try and teach us all to do this respectfully, because ultimately what we want to do is we want to build each other up, right? Sometimes we have to pick apart each other's ideas to try and share what we think is the best information, but this should ultimately be done with the intention that we want to help people to live their best life, to hold on to what we value the most, which is truth, right? So I talk a lot about living this good life, and I'll do some other videos on how to live this good life, because it's really not that difficult. It requires self-respect, and if you do not respect other people, then you can't respect yourself, right? If A, then B, therefore B is A, right? Or equal to A. So you need to respect other people to attain self-respect. If you respect other people, you can have self-respect. Without self-respect, you don't know how to respect other people. So they go back and forth. They feed to each other. This is the core of what you need to live a good life. To have self-respect, you attain the virtues, right? And then you treat people like you want to be treated. And it's pretty simple. So I'll probably talk a little bit more about that in another video. I think I've pretty much gone through. I think I might mention one other thing while I'm on this objective morality. So I was looking to, and you heard in that video, Richard Carey had mentioned a Phil Paper study. I actually looked at a couple of other studies that I want to cite here. He is correct that the majority of philosophers are atheists, and the majority of those philosophers are moral realists. So the objective moral position is actually the majority position. So one of the studies, that's the Phil Paper studies that he mentioned, I think it was 70% of philosophers. I looked at a couple other ones. I've got the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy entry on moral relativism, and then the Internet Encyclopedia of Philosophy on moral realism. So in 2009, a survey showed that 56% of philosophers accept or lean towards moral realism, but a more recent survey in 2020 showed that a consistent upwards trend has that number over 63%, including notable scholars in philosophy such as David Brink, John McDowell, Peter Railton, Jeffrey Sayre McCord, Michael Smith, Peter Singer, Thomas Nagel. Ayn Rand is a very well-known, more modern philosopher who believes in objective morality. Her views on objectivism, right? Good is that which sustains and furthers the life of rational beings, and that which harms, threatens, or destroys it is bad. Her objectivity that she comes out with for her moral argument, this standard is objective because it is based on the facts of reality and the observable nature of human beings as rational entities, rather than on subjective opinion, personal whim, or arbitrary postulate. And I think I will cite, and I did this in the debate, but I want to cite these philosophers as well. So natural law theory from Aquinas. St. Thomas Aquinas is a philosophical and legal theory. The natural law theory from Aquinas is a philosophical and legal theory that posits the existence of a set of inherent laws derived from nature and universal moral principles which are discoverable through reason. In ethics, natural law theory asserts that certain rights and moral values are inherent in human nature and can be understood universally, independent of enacted laws or societal norms. Immanuel Kant believed that morality is the objective law of reason, just as objective physical laws necessitate physical actions. For example, apples fall down because of gravity. Objective rational moral laws necessitate rational moral actions. Therefore, according to Kant, rational morality is universal and cannot change depending on circumstance. Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle all believed that morality was objective and could be understood through reason. Aristotle's ethics is built around the premise that people should achieve an excellent character by practicing virtue in order to ultimately attain well-being. It is sometimes referred to in comparison to later ethical theories known as character-based ethics. Like Plato and Socrates, Aristotle emphasized the importance of reason and that there were logical and natural reasons for humans to behave ethically and try to become morally virtuous. So that pretty much wraps up the argument. At this point, this is like phase probably 150. I've had to go back to the drawing board so many times. So again, please look over the argument. I will put the all the syllogisms I used in the description of the video. I ask you guys to pick them apart, use AI, use your, best resources or whatever you can. Come back and tell me where the holes are if you can find any, and I'll go back to the drawing board again. I think this is a pretty strong argument here that I've presented. It's definitely the strongest I've come up with yet. Want to thank Mark again for the great debate and for really pushing me, and invite him to interact with this video, and we'll hopefully be able to set something up. I'd love to do a live with him in front of another audience to introduce him to my audience and just help to get exposure to his ideas. He's a really sharp guy, and I'm very grateful for the time that he's given to me and the opportunity in doing that debate, because it did actually help my YouTube channel grow pretty significantly for just a few hours on the internet, which I'm really grateful of. And with that, I am going to try my first outro video. So you'll have to bear with me here. This is all new. I'm trying to up the quality of the channel a little bit. And Deconverted Man, who I should probably put a link to his channel in the description as well. I'll get Mark's channel in the description as well. But this is a song that Deconverted Man had put together for me. And so I'm just going to try and start doing this as an outro. You can give me some feedback on what you think about this. Until next time, thank you very much.
Let me calculate my odds of getting a big YouTube channel. 3.30 through repeating, of course. That's better than I've done before. And Deacon Brennan, what do you do? Just wait, objective ethics will be on your plate.